Welcome to the HR on the Offensive podcast, a weekly podcast by Lace Partners, a fundamentally different HR and payroll consultancy. Each week, we tackle some of the most interesting topics facing senior HR professionals. So whether that's from employee value proposition, performance management, people strategy, or even payroll, we cover it all. So join us for the next 30 minutes. And if you like what you hear, subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Now, on with the show. In today's HR on the Offensive podcast, I am joined by Becki Lovelady and Martin Colyer from our team to talk a little bit about data. We had a chat about the importance of data and reporting across the life cycle if you think about any kind of project or transformation that takes place. So if that is a new piece of tech that you're embedding in, and we talked a little bit around our Less Stress HRIS white paper series, which goes from the initial process of choosing your tech through to implementing your tech, and then we will be launching a piece around how do you optimize, whether you're three months later, 6 months later, 2 years later, or 5 years later, to make sure that you're getting the best out of your HRIS. But we had a chat about mindsets of business and how that needs to change. We had a little explore of whether or not people who are responsible for championing people data need to have a little bit of a megaphone personality, as I put it. And then we also talked about the value of storytelling as well. So hopefully you're going to enjoy it. Hopefully it is a good show. Let us know in the comments, and I will let myself, Becki, and Martin get on with it. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, and welcome to the latest HR on the Offensive podcast. It's me, Chris Howard from Lace Partners. Thank you, as always, for joining me. Today's podcast is in the office. It's with two of our experts who I don't think I've had one of them before, but I definitely know I've had another one. It's Martin Colyer. How you doing, Martin? Right?
Good, very well. Very good. Very excited.
Very excited to have you on. Really excited to have you on. And Becki Lovelady, how are you?
I'm good, thank you. How are you?
I'm good. We're going to talk a little bit of data, which is your area and analytics, but it's actually also Martin's area as well, because Martin, you're one of our HR tech specialists. So we're going to touch a little bit on some research that we've done, which we've talked about previously. Sean's done a really, really great podcast and live stream on the Less Stress HRIS Part 2 white paper that we put together that you can access on the Lace Partners website. It's called Less Stress HRIS Part 2, Beyond Basecamp, 8 Steps to Conquer Your HRIS Implementation. We're going to zone in on the data part today, actually, because the reason why we're doing that is, and the reason why we've got Becki and yourself here is, I guess, to give some context to people listening in, some of the pain points, some of the challenge questions, some of the things that not just our clients, but people who work in the tech space or in the HR space are talking to us about. And then, Becki, you're going to talk a little bit around some of the things that we've done to help to answer some of those pain points as well. But we might get both of you jumping in as well. So I guess really, we've got to do a fundamentally different question first. And Becki's chuckling because I've come up with a doozy today for you. So I'm actually going to get you to go first. And then it was a funny article which I've just read a couple of days ago about a completely spherical egg that has gone up for auction for thousands of pounds. So that I've got me thinking, what would be a food that if you could change the actual size of it, you would instantly do it? Like, we've all heard of square watermelons, for example. You were going to pick that one.
I was totally going to say that.
You can't, because it's already done. If you could reshape any type of foodstuffs, Becki, what would you go for?
Well, I'm still going to stick with watermelon because I think there's real value, but I'll go rectangular watermelon only because it will be a lot easier to slice. And also, Big Dirty Dancing fan, it would make it a lot easier to carry a watermelon if it was a more accessible shape.
Nice. Martin?
You could stack the watermelon.
Exactly.
Exactly. I would go for a square potato because it would make it much easier to cut chips.
Yeah, do you know what? The square is definitely got a full house here, because I'm thinking a square butternut squash, because they are really annoying to peel.
Exactly, they are.
A nice square butternut squash that makes life easier to store and then to peel. I liked the way that you were going, both of you, with your kind of processed mindsets, like it's easy to store. And with that not quite brilliant segue. Let's talk a little bit, Martin, about the Less Stress HRIS white paper. So I guess what I want to kick us off with, I don't want to go into all of the detail of the white paper. So perhaps if you could give us just a 1-minute overview as to what we talked about broadly, and then let's zone in on the data part of it, because that's step 4 that we talk about, which is the heart of your HRIS, data migration and cleansing for a smooth transition. So I guess two questions to kick us off, and then Becki could jump in on Martin's points. But a 1-minute overview on the paper itself in different sections, and then let's zone in on that data point as well.
We cover across the different less stress papers in terms of the journey that people go on, as trite as that might sound, but through the different aspects of delivering and what you need to do when you're considering your sort of tech delivery and what it means for you more broadly. So I guess where we're focusing in the less stress part 2 is looking at that sort of post go live phase, and in terms of actually what it means for you practically, because the part that nobody often really talks about in any great depth is actually we've had all this fanfare, we've had all the effort that's gone into a program and a project, but what happens when the big project team dissipates? What happens when you're left with the tech, the process, and all the things you've been working very hard for 12 to 18 months on in order to deliver? And actually, what do you do? What sort of the practical things? So we cover that through the paper, sort of looking at areas around what it means in terms of governance, continued change, reporting analytics, continued view of what you need to do in terms of integrating new technology, and obviously data being a critical part, because it's the lifeblood really of any solution, any technology. It's the thing that's described as the fumes of any process, but now very much is more of the key thing. It's actually going to keep your tech and your processes working.
And so let's then zone in, as we said, about the data point. And the reason why is obviously we constantly get asked around these questions, some client pain points. So Martin, Becki, do you want to jump in as to some of the questions we regularly get asked when it comes to data?
Data quality springs to mind as a big one. I think often that is something we see with our clients that they are struggling with. And I think it's a really difficult one to get right. And it has such a big impact. I don't think you realise the impact of poor data quality until you start to see the sort of knock-on impact it has downstream. So it makes your reports or your analytics and insights you're producing just less viable. It means that you can drive less meaning from them and take less kind of strategic decisions from the data throughout the business. So I think that's one that we hear kind of really frequently. And we'll talk more about kind of the things we've got in place at Lace to help our clients with that. But it's definitely one that I think is so key to getting right, and is really difficult. It's not an easy area to get right. But I think, as Martin said, thinking about it as this kind of strand that runs through any transformation journey is really going to help. Having data at the forefront of that and as a thread throughout the whole process is really going to help to kind of resolve some of those issues before they even become issues. So it's really going to help get your processes right, get how the data is being entered, how the system is managing that data is really going to help you start to manage that before it even becomes an issue.
And I think if we look at the different phases of where we talk to all of our clients, whether they're at a point of going through delivery, whether they've already gone live, is what we're talking about today, or actually even further out, data is the one consistent theme that will come up in any of those conversations. So to Becki's point around getting in early, thinking about some of those design decisions that would start to influence when and how you will look to use your data in future, and more importantly, what that data will give you in terms of insights, is critical at any point. But also remembering that it's never too late to start it either. So there's always a good point to be thinking. So data quality is always a key one, saying, well, we might have gone through a very hectic or very speedy implementation, something that's gone through maybe some issues, but actually coming back to then, well, what are the things that we might need to look to remediate or actually reassess what we've got in terms of the quality is always going to be critical. Because unless you get those foundation pieces right, we talk an awful lot about getting the foundations right, then you don't have, and it's, it might sound obvious, but you don't have the basis to then build anything else that you want to do in and around the rest of your technology estate. So I think that's certainly something we sort of hear loud and clear, isn't it, to people?
Yeah, and it's kind of easy to think that data is going to be something that maybe if you've got an IT team or your HR data reporting team, the noise is going to be coming from them. But I think what we're seeing more and more as well is, which really demonstrates the power that data has, is the noise is not just coming from those teams who maybe work on a daily basis with data directly, but from all of the other teams across the business that have requirements for that data and have requirements and use that data in some way. So whether that's within finance, validating, some of the headcount and budgeting information, whether that's from, like we said, from IT, whether that data is being passed from your HR system downstream into other systems that is used then for things like access and security, we are kind of able to kind of see that the problem is being caused further upstream, but we're hearing that noise from across the business. And it really just shows that this is something that doesn't just affect the people who look at that data, manage that data, have access to it every day on a daily basis. It's affecting the kind of wider business and having that real knock-on impact.
I want to ask you both actually a question which kind of links to that then. How much work needs to be done across businesses that you've either worked with yourself within the business or whilst you've been working? How much work needs to be done in terms of educating business-wide? Because it sounds very much like the types of conversations you guys often have is you go into a HR team or a HR analytics team and it's almost like their problem. Or you go into an IT team and it's almost their problem. So how much work do those types of teams need to do to educate the rest of the business? And is there any kind of thoughts you've got or advice you've got for teams as to how they go about educating the rest of the business? Well, look, the importance of this.
It's a really big education piece. And I think the more noise in a way you can make about it, the more that message is going to get through. And I do think it's something we are really seeing. I mean, I've been on implementation programs as that kind of lead in-house for that reporting and analytics piece. I'm really trying to get into every single conversation with every stakeholder to show them how the data and getting them to think about those design decisions, as Martin said, how that will impact the areas that they haven't even considered it will impact. So their processes and all the other bits and pieces that happen. I think it's a really challenging one. I think showing the impact of what that poor data or those poor data processes, showing the impact on those specific other teams is a really helpful way of getting them to really see why it's such a big issue. Everyone kind of only really reacts to things when they can see how it impacts them directly. They're not necessarily as interested if it's just the kind of more theoretical thing over here that they don't see impacting them. So really making that noise, flying that flag for data, especially if we're talking about implementation at the very, very early stages, getting in there early on and being in those conversations, in those workshops, in those design authority, in those design meetings, to really be able just to get people to consider it from a different angle, consider that the decision they're making about how some front end part of the system looks and works and feels, that the way that that's being designed has an impact on how that data is captured, and showing that kind of all the way through to being able to generate reports or being able to use that across the rest of your infrastructure. So yeah, it's a challenging one, but something that you can do in that space.
Go back maybe 10 years and start to talk about how, and it's to Becky's point about the impact of bad data. And that's not bad data. It might be just data that's not necessarily been designed in a particular way, so it's useful. So something that we also talk about more broadly is to say, well, actually, sometimes people come to us and say, oh, the technology is not doing what I need it to, or the experience is bad. When actually, when you dig into it, what it is that the data's not necessarily there at the point where somebody's coming to use it. So it almost exacerbates or highlights that point of, unless some of that thinking's been done up front, that something that is needed at the point that somebody is going to use it. We all know this in our daily lives. If we go to any form of a website or service that we've got, and I get there and my data's wrong, well, it's going to put me off in terms of how I'm going to use it. It also turns me off engaging with it in order to improve it. So there's some very real kind of practical impacts on actually having bad data in the first place. So there's a lot of things I talked about in the past in terms of good data breeds a better experience and bad data breeds a worse experience. And the other thing I think we try to sort of talk about then is almost getting to go back to the question about education. It's education, or I think the effect of bad data is then felt within HR and business teams talked about, but then also trying to get that education into the teams that are having an impact on the data to make sure it's maintained and being kept up to date. But also, as we move up through the different parts of an organization and a business, that they have some value on the data and actually attributing value to data. Because I think if we go back a number of years, data was always something that came from a process as opposed to an asset that you use and is now very, very valuable to businesses. And this is only going to change more and more as we move into the future, where we can then potentially do more with that data in order to yield value, which will then help improve productivity and efficiency and performance as well.
I've got a question then for both of you there, because it links to what you were just talking about the whole organization. It sounds as well, what you're talking about is a little bit of a mindset shift across business, really. It's leaders as well as people that are in the coalface, so to speak, that are analysing and interpreting that data. There's a bit of a mindset shift as to what this data is for. So my two questions, do you think that you almost need to, if you're responsible for trying to amplify the value of this, whether you work in an analytics team in HR, whether you work in the IT team, whatever it is, you need a bit of a megaphone personality. And what I mean by that is just being able to shout a little bit more and not being the traditional kind of data nerd that sits in a corner and is quiet.
Steady. I think that it's probably on two fronts, because I think we have yes, absolutely, getting the messaging right around it showing real value and tangible value. I'm sure both Becki and I would admit sometimes it can get a bit academic and this is what we should do and this is why we should do it. Let's all follow the rules, shall we? Which is important. So I'm not going to put that necessarily completely out of the picture. But I think it comes into, well, can you show me something that is valuable to me and brings it to life? So yes, exactly right. So you've got the megaphone element, but to your point, what is the story that I'm telling with my megaphone?
And I think those data nerds, as you call them, I think they often do have.
I'm going to get absolutely countering now.
But I think they actually have those, typically have those skills as well of being able to, that if part of that role is looking at the data, analysing it, understanding it, interpreting it. Like Martin said, it's all about the story you tell with it and how you sell it to the person you're presenting it to. But being able to really show the value and show in evidence the importance of something is what being an analyst is and somebody who works with data is all about. So I don't think you do need to have that megaphone personality to do it. I wouldn't say I've got that personality, but I think when I've been put on projects like that, it's all about, you can be quiet and more introverted, but as long as you're really clear and like Martin said, you can show that person what the impact is to them. I think that message comes through time and time again. It's all about just making it relevant and making it relevant to them and selling it in the best way.
My second question, which kind of links to what we were talking about and also some of the conversations we've had already, is I want you guys to reflect on, so we've talked, and particularly with the less stress HRIS, in the first paper we talked about it's the beginning of your journey. You're trying to decide what tech you want, and part of that process you might want to build the art of the possible in terms of how we ensure that we get the foundations right that you talked about with our data processes, how we're going to manage data, how we're going to keep it something that is a regularly ongoing thing and not just we've launched a new project, we've launched a new piece of tech, we've got our processes and our foundations are in place, absolutely fine. So any bits of advice or thoughts around beyond that, which is the second paper, it's that implementation piece. But even then beyond that, beyond the first 12 months, 18 months, how do you maintain the energy from across the business to avoid falling into that trap of bad data? Any kind of thoughts on that?
It's definitely a challenge. I think maintaining the energy around anything in any space is very difficult. And obviously that's putting a great change strategy in place to help with that and help land the product is going to be essential to that, and bringing everyone on that journey, not just, your managers, your line managers, your employees who are going to be using the system in a slightly different way. Every single person who has a role to play within that new technology and that new software, I think bringing them along on that journey is always going to be helpful, giving them buy-in to what they're building and designing, it's helping them to see how what they've designed and the decisions that they've made along the way has helped make their job easier, more efficient, is helping them on a daily basis. So I'm thinking analytics team particularly, how do they kind of continue to get the value from the system? If they can see that the data that's gone into the system and the way it's been set up is really valuable and is providing a really great quality of data, they will see the outputs of that in that they'll be producing analytics and insights that's really helping to shape the strategy and change the way things are being done. So I think it's all about getting that messaging right really early on, bringing people along on that journey, making it, again, this whole theme of this is making it relevant to them and selling them on the point that it's going to make a difference day to day with them. And then really that's just about then how you manage that change on an ongoing process. If having things like adoption metrics that really show that the baseline place you started from, how far you've come from that, and evidencing the change that you've made in implementing that system, I think that's what keeps the energy going with anything. And I think them being able to really see the great outputs they're getting as a result long term is great.
And it's sort of building on that sort of, if we kind of take the perspective of feeling what it's post go live, saying I'm not getting what I need, or actually am I? I think the thing that is taking it more from a sort of a leader perspective to say, am I listening? Am I getting the feedback? So, love the adoption metrics is a really key thing to be monitoring. If I come back to this key point, if people are going to a particular part of a new solution and trying to engage with it, and it's not necessarily giving them what they need in terms of data or the reporting or the insight, it's likely they're going to stop using it. So being able to continue that feedback loop, and it's really, really important post go live, couldn't stress it enough, to keep, it's not a one and done and then we stop. It's keeping the sort of focus on what is it that is telling us, because the other thing then to be sort of aware of is that the point that we're going to go, you're live, this technology that you've got will continue to change and evolve. So it might be that you go live in a particular month, and 2 to 3, 6 months after that, you've got a whole host of new pieces of functionality that are available, and it's going to have an impact on the data that you're capturing and collecting. So I think the big lesson in this is that sort of preparedness for that post go live period to be in a constant feedback loop to figure out what the key signals are. They talk an awful lot about signals at the moment in data. What the signals are that it's telling you, and what you can therefore do to that to continue to improve it. If I flash forward and almost to see, well, go through that go live, that post go live period, what we then sort of start to hear at the end of that cycle is a year down the line is, well, we've not necessarily done that. The data's now gone so far to the right. What do we need to do? And we're now very much coming back into that phase of saying, well, how can we help you optimize what? But actually, there's ways that if you can start to go through that in that post-go-live period, you can start to sort of limit that need to sort of get to that point in the future. So that feedback loop, critical.
Don't be afraid to constantly iterate, and probably the acceptance that change is ever present within whatever project you're working on is really, really interesting. We've got about 5 minutes left, maybe 10 minutes left, and I want to touch on some of the specifics around the offering that we've got, some of the problems that it solves. So, Becki, can you just give us a bit of a top line as to some of the key questions, again, that we're trying to help answer with this offering that we are releasing out to the market all around data quality and reporting?
Yeah, so I think it touches on a lot of the points we've already made around kind of it helps to, and this is an offering that is quite bespoke based on our clients' needs, and it meets them really where they are within that journey. So it could be that they're going into implementing a new piece of software. It could be that they're reviewing where they're at with it kind of 6 months down the line. So we can really meet people where they are, but it's all about helping them to kind of figure out whereabouts they are in the process, in their journey, in their kind of, I suppose, this sort of data maturity curve we talk about a little bit, but it's getting them to realize where their strengths are in this space, where maybe there are opportunities for improvement, what some of the root causes of these issues are. So if it is data quality, what part of the design or the process that's been put in place is causing that problem? Because we can really help to then start unpacking that with our clients and really start to put some of those solutions in early on to help resolve that before they become bigger issues. So it's all about kind of helping our clients really understand some of the root causes of these issues and then helping to put those solutions in place to really help them get back on the right track.
Lovely. And Martin, one of the things I also wanted to touch on, so we've talked about the less stress first paper, which was the beginning. And then we talked about so you've chosen your tech and you've gone through all of your due diligence and you've put your foundations in place, and now you've done the implementation phase. But I just want you to talk a little bit around, we've got a third piece that we're looking at launching as well, because that's very much, I think that can be applied in different instances, can't it? Because it can be, well, we've naturally just outgrown our system. It could, and so we're looking for something different, maybe a rapidly increasing in headcount business. It could be an M&A that taking place, and so you've got multiple systems, and none of the systems really work. It could be that you have just fallen into the trap of you've got so far into the data weeds in terms of not getting your foundation right, that you just need to unpick it all. And then you've also got that part which is, for some organizations, they've had a system for so long. And we will work with businesses when they have problems, if they have challenges with their technology. It's quite, sometimes, as you said, it's not always the technology, but sometimes it might be. They just feel not the right fit for the organisation. So can you just touch a little bit on that third piece, which we call optimization, with all of that framing and waffle that I've just, I've just unloaded on you?
Well, no, you've kind of framed the different points that we meet clients and organisations in. All the things we've talked about today. There'll be various decision points that have got everybody to that to where they are. And it might not necessarily be as a result of the project. It could be, as you say, because the business has fundamentally changed. And, with the way tech is moving at the moment, then businesses are changing slower than the tech's moving. So it's not price. But within the sort of optimized sort of aspect of this is that it's a framing of organizations that have been in and have a level of maturity, and whether that maturity is taken to the point where they're getting the best use or best value for what they've invested in, or actually if it's to the point of saying, well, we're actually looking as to what we can do next because the business is changing, or we can see that tech has changed as well. So it's why there's an aspect of optimize, but there's also an aspect of enhance as well. So it's what do we do to shore up the foundations potentially of what we've bought or fix them, or equally, and I think one of the biggest drivers that we've got is not only is it the things that we've talked about today that data impacts and would need to be remediated, because it might not be the tech, it might be the data, it might be the adoption piece, there could be aspects of change that needs to be supported, going back to our megaphone. But equally, I think one of the big questions of what we then see if it's not optimizing is the enhance phase, which is just saying, well, what is it that where the technology is taking us in terms of the question that it is asking of the data that we've got and exposing shortfalls. So not to make this too much about AI, but it is big. It is the area that is going to ask the most questions about data and will expose whether data is in a fit state in order for some intelligence to be gained from it. That's not necessarily different from what we were talking about earlier in terms of analytics and insight, because it's us asking questions of the data, but in future, it's going to be, more automated frame of doing that. So we've got two aspects of optimize certainly in there, of the things that we either need to shore up, fix, or just understand where organizations have changed, but equally then start to throw into the future so that we can start to give some guidance towards, well, how do we start to future-proof this so that we can continue to make the most from the investment in whatever tech people have chosen to go with, or equally what we can talk to them about, what is out in the market, what is changing.
That's a really, really good way of us just wrapping up today. That white paper will be released. We're working on a May, June deadline at the time of recording. But if you do want to have a chat with Martin or any of the team about some of the challenges you're having, whether it's trying to look at changing behaviours of people that are interacting with the tech, or we talked about that feedback side as well, or the system not quite doing what you need, reach out to us, drop us a note. You can either just use the website as a contact us, or reach out on LinkedIn to Martin or Becki or any of the team. Guys, absolutely amazing spending a bit of time with you today. Thank you very much for giving me half an hour of your time, and more importantly, giving me real insight into your what would I change vegetable-wise perspectives. Hopefully you've enjoyed this podcast from myself, from Becki, and from Martin. Thank you very much for listening, and we'll catch you next time on the HR on the Effective Podcast. Bye-bye.